The desert stretched endlessly before Samuel Carter, its sandy expanse broken only by the occasional sagebrush and weathered rock formation. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on his weathered face, casting long shadows that danced across the barren landscape like ghosts from another time. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Thunder, moved with practiced efficiency through the difficult terrain, its hooves creating small clouds of dust with each step that seemed to hang in the still air before slowly settling back to earth. Samuel had been riding for 3 days straight, following a cattle trail that had gone cold near the Mexican border. The relentless heat had baked the ground hard as stone, and the constant squinting against the sun's glare had left deep lines around his blue eyes. His lips were cracked from dehydration despite careful rationing of his water, and his throat felt like sandpaper with each swallow. As a bounty hunter and occasional cattle wrangler, he'd learned to read the signs that others missed: broken twigs, disturbed earth, the subtle patterns that told stories of who had passed this way and when. A bent blade of grass could tell him which direction riders had traveled. Hoof prints in soft sand could reveal whether horses were carrying heavy loads or moving at speed. But today, something else caught his attention, something that made his stomach tighten with an unnamed dread. A dark shape lay motionless about 50 yards ahead, partially hidden behind a cluster of desert rocks that looked like ancient sentinels guarding some terrible secret. At first, Samuel thought it might be a dead animal, perhaps a horse that had succumbed to the harsh conditions that claimed so many lives in this unforgiving land. But as Thunder drew closer, the shape took on a distinctly human form, and Samuel felt his pulse quicken. "Whoa, boy," Samuel whispered, pulling gently on the reins. Thunder came to a stop, snorting softly and shifting nervously from hoof to hoof. The horse's ears flicked forward and back, and his nostrils flared as he tested the air. Something about this place made him deeply uneasy, and Samuel had learned long ago to trust his horse's instincts. Thunder had saved his life more than once by sensing danger before Samuel's human senses could detect it. Samuel dismounted slowly, his legs stiff from 3 days in the saddle. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, and he could feel the heat of the desert floor even through the thick leather solace. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip, the familiar weight of the weapon providing a small measure of comfort. Years of frontier living had taught him that in this harsh land, trust was a luxury that could cost a man his life. Every stranger was a potential threat until proven otherwise, and even then, caution was the price of survival. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of something metallic and ominous. Samuel recognized it immediately, the smell of blood, already beginning to attract the flies that seemed to appear from nowhere in this desert wasteland. As he approached the figure, Samuel could see it was a Native American warrior, probably Apache based on his clothing and the intricate beadwork on his leather vest. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with tiny glass beads forming patterns that told stories Samuel couldn't read, but could appreciate for their beauty and complexity. The man lay on his side, his long black hair spread across the sand like spilled ink, his breathing shallow and labored. Dark stains on his shirt and the ground beneath him told the story of severe blood loss. The sand around him had turned a rusty brown color, and Samuel could see that the bleeding had been going on for some time. Multiple bullet wounds punctured the warrior's chest and abdomen, and it was clear that whoever had done this had left him here to die alone under the scorching sun. Samuel crouched down, maintaining a safe distance of about 10 feet. The warrior's eyes fluttered open, dark brown orbs filled with pain and the unmistakable knowledge that death was near. They were intelligent eyes, Samuel noticed, eyes that had seen much in their time. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, representatives of peoples who had been locked in conflict for generations, yet in this moment connected by the simple fact of their shared humanity. The Apache warrior tried to speak, his lips moving soundlessly at first, then producing only a weak whisper that was carried away by the desert wind before Samuel could make out the words. His hand moved slightly, as if reaching for something, perhaps a weapon, perhaps just grasping at life itself, then fell back to the ground with a soft thud. Samuel could see that the man's strength was almost gone, that death was perhaps only minutes away. Samuel's mind raced through possibilities and calculations. This could be a trap. Apache warriors were legendary for their cunning and strategic thinking, their ability to turn apparent weakness into deadly advantage. Perhaps this was bait, designed to lure him into an ambush. He glanced around nervously, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, any indication that hostile eyes were watching him from behind rocks or scrub brush. His hand remained near his pistol, ready to draw and fire at the first sign of trouble. But as he looked back at the dying man, Samuel saw something that gave him pause. In those pain-filled eyes, he recognized something that transcended race or tribal affiliation, the fear and loneliness that comes with facing death alone, far from home and family. This wasn't the face of a warrior planning an attack. This was simply a man, probably no older than Samuel himself, breathing his last breaths in a hostile desert. The sun continued its relentless assault, and Samuel realized that regardless of who this man was or what tribe he belonged to, he was suffering in a way that no living creature should have to endure. The cowboy had seen enough death in his 35 years in the Civil War, in countless frontier conflicts, in the natural cruelties of life on the range to recognize when someone had only hours, perhaps minutes, left to live. Thunder whinnied softly behind him, as if sensing his master's internal struggle. The sound seemed to echo in the vast emptiness, a lonely cry that emphasized just how isolated they all were in this harsh landscape. Samuel stood up slowly, his decision forming in his mind despite every survival instinct screaming against it. The wind picked up as evening approached, carrying with it the promise of a cold desert night. The temperature in this harsh landscape could drop 40 degrees or more once the sun disappeared, transforming the scorching wasteland into an unforgiving frozen hell. Samuel knew that if the warrior's wounds didn't kill him, the dropping temperature certainly would. The man was shivering now, violent tremors that shook his entire frame as his body struggled to maintain warmth while his life ebbed away, like water through cupped hands. Samuel watched the warrior's labored breathing, each inhalation seeming to require tremendous effort. The man's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and his fingertips were already showing signs of the cold that would soon claim him. It was a cruel irony to survive the bullets only to freeze to death under the desert stars. Samuel walked back to his horse with heavy steps, each footfall seeming to echo in the growing silence. Thunder stood patiently, occasionally stamping his hooves or swishing his tail at persistent flies. The horse's presence was comforting in this desolate place, a reminder that Samuel wasn't completely alone in this vast emptiness. He untied his bedroll with deliberate care, his calloused fingers working the familiar knots that had secured his possessions through countless nights on the trail. Inside was his only blanket, a thick wool covering that had been his constant companion through 20 years of frontier living. The fabric was worn soft from use, faded from sun and weather, but still sturdy and warm. It had been a gift from his late wife Martha, who had sewn reinforced patches onto it with her own hands before he left for his first cattle drive 2 decades ago. Samuel could still remember watching her work by lamplight in their small cabin, her needle moving with precise, loving strokes as she prepared him for the dangers ahead. She had used scraps from her own dresses for some of the patches, a piece of blue gingham from her Sunday best, red flannel from a winter shirt, yellow cotton from a summer dress that had made her eyes sparkle like sunshine. The blanket represented more than just protection from the elements. It was his tangible connection to home, to warmth, to the memory of the woman who had loved him unconditionally despite his flaws and wandering ways. On the coldest nights, when the frontier seemed determined to claim his soul along with his body, that blanket had been his salvation. When loneliness threatened to consume him completely, He could wrap himself in its familiar embrace and remember what it felt like to be loved. Martha had died of fever 7 years ago, while he was away on a cattle drive. He'd returned home to find her grave already marked with a simple wooden cross and wildflowers that the neighboring women had placed there. The blanket was one of the few physical reminders he had of their life together, along with a lock of her hair in his saddlebag and her wedding ring on a chain around his neck. Now, as he held the blanket in his weathered hands, Samuel faced an impossible choice. Giving it to the dying warrior would mean a cold, uncomfortable night for himself, possibly even risking his own health in the process. More importantly, it would mean parting with one of his most precious possessions for someone who was clearly beyond saving, someone who might draw his last breath at any moment. What would Martha do? He whispered to himself, the words carried away by the desert wind that was growing stronger as night approached. The answer came to him as clearly as if she were standing beside him, her gentle voice echoing in his memory. Martha had possessed a kindness that transcended race, religion, or tribal affiliation. She had seen humanity in everyone, even in those whom society deemed enemies. She had fed hungry travelers regardless of their skin color, tended to wounded soldiers from both sides during the war, and treated every human being with the dignity she believed they deserved simply by virtue of being alive. If she were here now, she wouldn't hesitate for even a moment. She would see not an Apache warrior, not an enemy, but simply a fellow human being suffering alone and afraid. Samuel folded the blanket carefully, running his hand over the familiar patches one last time. Then he walked back to the Apache warrior, who was now barely conscious. The man's breathing had become even more labored, each breath a monumental effort that seemed to require every ounce of his remaining strength. Frost was beginning to form on the rocks around them, and Samuel could see his own breath in small white puffs. "I'm sorry this happened to you," Samuel said quietly as he knelt beside the warrior. "I don't know who did this, but you didn't deserve to die alone out here." He gently spread the wool blanket over the warrior's trembling body, tucking the edges carefully around him to trap as much warmth as possible. The fabric, still warm from being pressed against Thunder's flank, seemed to provide immediate relief. The moment the blanket touched him, the Apache opened his eyes fully for the first time since Samuel had found him. For a moment, confusion clouded his features as he tried to process what was happening. Then his gaze met Samuel's, and something passed between them, a recognition that went beyond language or cultural barriers. There was surprise in those dark depths, certainly, but also something deeper. The warrior's eyes widened as he realized that this white man, this stranger who could have simply ridden past, had given him his own protection against the cold. "Easy there, friend," Samuel said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Nobody should die alone in the cold. Whatever brought you to this place, whatever happened between your people and mine, that doesn't matter now. Right now, you're just a man who needs help." The warrior's lips moved, forming words in his native language that Samuel couldn't understand but recognized as deeply meaningful. The tone was unmistakable. It was a prayer, or perhaps a blessing, spoken with a kind of reverence reserved for sacred moments. The man's weathered hand emerged from beneath the blanket and reached toward Samuel with obvious effort. Without thinking, the cowboy took the outstretched hand in both of his own. The warrior's skin was cold, almost icy, but his grip still held surprising strength. They sat like that as darkness fell over the desert, two men from peoples who had been enemies for generations, sharing a moment of pure humanity under the emerging stars. Samuel could feel the warrior's pulse growing weaker with each passing minute, could see the life slowly leaving his eyes like a candle flame guttering in the wind. But there was peace there too. A calmness that hadn't been present when Samuel first found him lying alone among the rocks. As the first stars began to appear in the vast night sky above them, the Apache warrior gathered his remaining strength and spoke one final word in English, his voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "Brother." The word hung in the air between them for a moment, heavy with meaning and finality. Then the warrior's hand relaxed in Samuel's grip. His eyes closed for the last time, and he was gone. Samuel sat in the darkness for a long time, still holding the dead man's hand. The desert night was indeed cold, and without his blanket, he could feel the chill seeping into his bones like ice water. His teeth began to chatter, and he had to pull his jacket tighter around his shoulders. But somehow, the physical discomfort didn't matter. He had done something that felt right, something that honored not just the dying warrior's dignity, but his own humanity as well. Eventually, with infinite care, Samuel gently closed the warrior's eyes and arranged the blanket more carefully around his body, making sure he looked peaceful and dignified in death. Tomorrow he would need to decide what to do about burial, but tonight he would keep vigil. It seemed like the least he could do. As he settled in beside a large rock, using his saddle as a pillow and pulling his jacket as tightly around himself as possible, Samuel reflected on the strange turn his day had taken. He had started the morning as a bounty hunter tracking stolen cattle, focused on nothing more than the promise of a payday. Now he sat mourning a man who, under different circumstances, might have tried to kill him. The desert was full of mysteries, but perhaps the greatest mystery was the human heart's capacity for compassion, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. Samuel awoke to the sound of horses approaching, their hoofbeats creating a steady rhythm against the desert floor. In his years on the frontier, he had developed the ability to sleep lightly, always alert to sounds that could mean danger. The rhythmic thudding of multiple horses was unmistakable, and it was growing closer. The first light of dawn painted the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold. Samuel remained perfectly still, his body tense as he assessed the situation. From the sound, he estimated at least a dozen riders, and they were moving with purpose. As the sound grew nearer, Samuel could make out voices speaking in Apache. His heart began to race. He was completely exposed, lying next to the body of one of their warriors, with nowhere to run or hide. Thunder stood about 20 yards away, but trying to reach his horse would certainly result in him being spotted. The first rider appeared over a small rise, silhouetted against the morning sky. He sat his horse with natural grace, his long hair flowing behind him and a rifle ready across his lap. Then another appeared, and another, until Samuel counted 15 Apache warriors on horseback, all armed and moving with deadly efficiency. The lead rider was an older man with gray streaks in his long black hair and intricate war paint on his weathered face. His bearing spoke of authority and wisdom earned through countless battles. Feathers adorned his hair, and the elaborate beadwork on his clothing indicated high status within the tribe. The elder spotted Samuel immediately. He raised his hand, and the entire group came to a halt with military precision. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick, and Samuel could hear only the soft snorting of horses and the whisper of wind across sand. Then the elder's gaze fell upon the blanket-covered form beside Samuel, and his expression changed dramatically. He said something in Apache to the other warriors, his voice filled with sorrow and surprise. Several of the younger warriors reached for their weapons, anger burning in their eyes. But the elder held up his hand again, stopping them with a gesture that brooked no argument. Samuel slowly raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. "I mean no harm," he called out. "I found him yesterday evening. He was already dying when I got here." The elder dismounted and walked slowly toward Samuel, his weathered face controlled but emotional. The other warriors remained mounted but kept their hands near their weapons, ready to act if their leader was threatened. When the elder reached the blanket, he knelt down and carefully pulled it back to reveal the warrior's face. Samuel heard him whisper something that sounded like a name, Ayana, and saw the profound pain that crossed his features. This wasn't just any warrior. This was someone precious to these people. The elder's shoulders sagged slightly, then he composed himself, drawing on inner strength that had sustained him through a lifetime of leadership. The elder looked up at Samuel, studying his face with penetrating eyes. When he finally spoke, his English was heavily accented but clear. "You covered my son," he said, and Samuel felt his throat tighten. Son. He had given his blanket to this man's son. "Yes," Samuel replied simply. "He shouldn't have died alone in the cold. No man should face death without dignity." The elder stood and said something to the other warriors in rapid Apache. Several looked confused, even angry, but they listened respectfully. Then something unexpected happened. The elder smiled, transforming his entire appearance. "My son Ayana was wounded in battle with Mexican soldiers 3 days ago," the elder explained. "We have been searching for him since then. I am Cochise, his father and chief of our band." Samuel felt his blood turn cold. He had heard the name Cochise before, a legendary Apache leader respected even by his enemies. To be talking with him under these circumstances felt surreal. "You could have taken your blanket and ridden away," Cochise continued. "You could have left him for the buzzards. Instead, you gave him dignity in death. You treated him as you would treat your own brother." "He was dying," Samuel said simply. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Cochise nodded approvingly, then turned and spoke rapidly to his warriors. Samuel watched as several dismounted and began removing items from their horses' blankets with intricate patterns: leather pouches, food, water skins, and small carved wooden items. "In our culture," Cochise explained, "when someone shows great kindness to a member of our family, we honor that kindness with gifts. These are tokens of our gratitude, symbols of our respect for what you have done." Samuel was speechless as the warriors approached, each placing items on the ground before him. There were beautiful blankets woven with traditional patterns, dried meat that would last for weeks, water skins filled with precious fresh water, and small carved items that Samuel recognized as being significant in Apache culture. But it was more than just the gifts. It was the way the warriors looked at him, not with hatred or suspicion, but with something approaching respect. These men had ridden hard for days, searching for their fallen comrade, only to find him dead. But instead of seeking revenge against the white man they found beside the body, they were offering gifts. "This is too much," Samuel said, overwhelmed by the generosity. "I don't deserve." "You gave your blanket to a dying enemy," Cochise interrupted. "That takes a special kind of courage. In our eyes, you are no longer an enemy." Samuel was overwhelmed as the Apache warriors approached, each carrying items of deep personal significance. There were beautiful blankets woven with traditional patterns that told stories in geometric designs, dried meat carefully prepared for long journeys, water skins filled with precious fresh water, and small carved items that held spiritual meaning in Apache culture. But it was more than the material gifts. It was the way the warriors looked at him, not with hatred, but with respect. These men had searched for days for their fallen comrade, only to find him dead. Instead of seeking revenge, they were offering gratitude. "This is too much," Samuel said, gesturing at the growing pile of presents. "I don't deserve all this. I only did what seemed right." "You gave your blanket to a dying enemy," Cochise replied, his hand falling on Samuel's shoulder. "That takes special courage. In our eyes, you are no longer an enemy. You are Wazichu Wakaga, sacred white man, one who has shown honor to our people." As the warriors finished placing their gifts, Cochise knelt beside his son's body one final time. He spoke quietly an Apache father's farewell, prayers for safe passage to the spirit world. The other warriors stood in respectful silence, and Samuel removed his hat, recognizing the solemnity of the moment. Samuel found himself thinking about his own father, Jonas Carter, who had died when Samuel was 16. The crushing weight of grief, the way it carved out a piece of his chest and left him hollow. Looking at Cochise, he recognized that same profound loss. Pain was universal. It didn't matter what language you spoke or what color your skin was. "Ayana means eternal blossom in our language," Cochise said quietly, rising to his feet. We named him that because he was born during spring, when the desert blooms with impossible beauty. His mother said he would bring grace to a harsh world. Sounds like he was a good man, Samuel replied. He was young, perhaps too eager to prove himself in battle. But yes, he was good. He had his mother's gentle heart and his grandfather's wisdom. Cochise looked at Samuel with penetrating eyes. What is your name, friend? Samuel Carter. Most folks just call me Sam. Sam Carter, you have shown my family great kindness in our darkest hour. This will not be forgotten for as long as the mountains stand. These gifts are symbols of our gratitude and our promise that you will always be welcome among the Apache. One of the younger warriors spoke to Cochise in Apache, concern in his voice. The elder listened, then turned back to Samuel. Running Bear asks if you are traveling alone. The desert can be dangerous for a solitary rider, especially now. I can take care of myself, Samuel replied, then reconsidered. But I appreciate the concern. Where are you headed? Cochise asked. I was tracking stolen cattle, but the trail went cold. Now I'm just trying to make it to the next town. Cochise spoke to his warriors, and after a brief discussion, he turned back to Samuel. Yuma Creek is one day's ride northwest. There is a trading post run by McGillicuddy, an honest trader who sometimes needs experienced men. But be careful, the men who shot my son are likely still in this area. Samuel felt a chill. Mexican soldiers? No, Cochise said grimly. White men. Bandits led by a man called Broken Nose Jake. They shot Ayanna and took his horse, then left him to die slowly. They find pleasure in causing suffering. The weight of this information settled on Samuel. The same men who had killed Ayanna might still be out there, and he could easily be their next target. His simple act of kindness had connected him to something much larger. Thank you for the warning, Samuel said. And thank you for the gifts. I'll treasure them for what they represent. Cochise smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. My son died with dignity because of your kindness, Sam Carter. That means more to a father than all the gold in the mountains. As the Apache prepared to leave, carrying Ayanna's body for proper burial, Cochise approached Samuel one final time. In his hands was a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. This belonged to Ayanna, he said, pressing the pouch into Samuel's hands. It contains sacred herbs that will heal wounds and ward off infection. In our tradition, we give something personal of the departed to those who showed them kindness in their final moments. Samuel accepted the pouch with reverence, understanding this was more than a gift, it was a sacred trust. I'll carry it with honor, he promised. I'll remember him. As the Apache riders disappeared over the horizon, Samuel stood alone once more. But something fundamental had changed. The harsh landscape no longer seemed so threatening, and the isolation no longer felt complete. He gathered the gifts, blankets that would keep him warm, food that would sustain him, water that might save his life. But most valuable was the knowledge that simple human kindness could bridge any gap. Samuel packed the gifts carefully, taking special care with Ayanna's medicine pouch, which he tucked close to his heart. As he mounted Thunder and continued toward Yuma Creek, he reflected on the extraordinary events. He had started as just another drifter. Now he carried the blessing of an Apache chief and the knowledge that he had honored a brave young warrior's memory. The desert stretched ahead, but Samuel Carter rode forward with new understanding. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could have the largest consequences. Sometimes, covering a dying enemy with your blanket could transform everything. And sometimes, in the vast emptiness of the American frontier, strangers could become brothers with nothing more than a simple gesture of compassion. He carried with him Ayanna's final word, brother, and the knowledge that somewhere in this harsh landscape, people would remember his kindness for generations to come.